Buenos días, mi nombre es Salvador, trabajo para la compañía de VPS. Vamos a hablar de aquí de una disca para mirar unos pequeños detalles. Este es el arado que va en medio. Por favor, cuando den vuelta, asegúrense que suba bastante para arriba para que este no se doble. Es lo que pasó, dieron vuelta y se dobló. También esos tienen cada base de disco tiene dos valeros. También cuando está arriba lo pueden chequear. Si tiene juego es que tenemos un valero quebrado. Este es su ajuste. Depende cómo el ángulo, cómo quieran cortar su terreno. Aquí tiene para que lo vayan a ajustar su equipo. Toda quebradura que miren, craqueadas, por favor repórtenlo como esta que está aquí. Repórtenlo al supervisor para que lo pongan en reporte para reparar, para que nos avisen a nosotros. La rola también puede agarrar rede de las viñas y también se pueden quemar los valeros. Esta se requiere que la estén engrasando 3 veces al día porque esta todo el tiempo está dando vuelta. Asegúrense que no tengan quebrado sus valeros o que pierdan un anillo. Asegúrense que todo esto está bien, que aseguren su pasador, que tenga seguro abajo, porque si no se les puede caer.
Hi, my name is Freddie with VPS. Today we're going to talk about discs and cultivation. A few things to check on the disc implement before we start operating is one, to see if there's any cracks on the frame itself, any wear that will, potentially break when you're working. One things we also like to check are the bearings on the disc itself before you start, is to make sure there's no play on them. The way you check them is with the disc off the ground. You shake them back and forth, and if there's a lot of play, please let your supervisor know instantly. One thing you also want to check before you operate is to have these guards in place and they're not broken. Like this one here is a good example. It's missing a couple bolts. Report that before you start working with this implement. These guards are important because if you run without the guards, you have a potential of throwing a lot of dirt into the berm, which will cause it to start growing grass underneath the vine, and that's not great for weed management. One also thing you want to check as you're working across your disc is make sure you have these pins that lock the disc in place to set your angles. And then you also want to check for any cracks. Like on this one here, you can see the cracks on top. If you see any cracks, let your supervisor know instantly as well before you operate. One other thing you want to check is you have a ring roller in the back. You also want to check to see there's you get sometimes there's wires in the vineyard that are broken, and we have a tendency of catching them here. Make sure there's no wire, there's no netting or any kind of tape or any kind of debris in the bearing side. There's also a grease point on this bearing. We would like to see, we recommend for you to grease them 3 times a day, morning, midday, and after work, just to make sure there's plenty of grease there. That way that shaft won't get worn down. And if you see like this, if you see that this bearing is no longer turning or seized up, please let your supervisor know as well. One other thing, that happens constantly in the vineyard is whenever we lift the equipment up, we don't lift it up all the way, and this center shank has a tendency of dragging when you're turning, and that's why this one is bent here, as you can tell. The operator did not lift it all the way and did a sharp turn and caused it to bend.
También vamos a mirar los guardas aquí para evitar que aviente tierra para las orillas. Esto ya está pegando en el disco. Cuando se ajusta necesitan de ajustarlo para acá, para cuando muevan su disco no esté pegando en el play
One thing you also want to inspect is your guard here. Make sure your guards are not hitting your disc. As you can tell on this one, it's been rubbing for a very long time, and it's worn down to the point where that may be repairing or replacement. So before you operate, make sure this are not are not hitting metal to metal. If they are, please let your supervisor know.